Often in life, there comes a moment when the true value of time is realized. Whether it is hiking up a mountain and staring at a beautiful vista or holding a patient's hand as they're dying, you come to realize that each moment is so precious and needs to be experienced to its maximum potential. It is during these times that you also realize the true dichotomy of a single fragile moment. That it is somehow both transient yet permanent, moving yet stagnant, vast yet contained, and constant yet changing. In this beautiful chaos of a constantly changing single moment, I dare to ask the most difficult question. How do you pause time when time cannot be paused? This question came about as I rode the roller coaster of life during this past year. In February of 2023, my wife and I were on a trip of a lifetime, hiking the Chilean mountains of Patagonia with limited cell phone service. On the first day at our campsite, I managed to get signal and saw the most terrible text with the news of my grandfather being in the ICU with respiratory failure. For the rest of the trip, I would try to find some signal to actively have conversations about his code status with my family. As I reached United States on a Sunday afternoon with planned work for Monday morning, I got the news of my grandfather taking his final breath. Devastated, guilty, and overcome with grief, I sat there not knowing what to do. The thoughts that were running in my head included, can I justify taking a couple of days off after going on a week-long trip? Would taking time off put unnecessary burden on my colleagues who would have to cover me? Do I look for trades? Should I call my boss on a Sunday evening and let him know what had happened? And then, how do I honor my grandpa, who I was so close to and didn't even get to say goodbye to? So I did what any other person in medicine would do. I took one day off to virtually attend his funeral and then went to work the next day. Business as usual. That week was so hard. I kept wondering, how do I pause time when it really cannot be paused? Time, like everything in life, kept moving. Just like a roller coaster has its downs, it also has its ups. We had hours as we moved to Boston in July of 2023 for my wife to start her dream fellowship. Our highs got higher when we found out that we were going to invite a new life into this world as we announced the news of our pregnancy to our families. What came next was the steepest drop of our life. In a new city with an emotionally exhausted work environment and limited social support, we were forced to confront a late-term pregnancy loss. At 21 weeks of pregnancy, parents usually start transforming the envisioned beautiful dream into elements of reality. We too were scrolling through Amazon looking for a crib and imagining where in our room it would go. Our dreams in a fragile moment were shattered into reality as we had to face the unimaginable pain of losing our loved one. While this was all going on, there was an inner guilt gnawing at me. In a new workplace, how can I justify taking some time off? What will I even tell my boss? Do I email my entire program asking them for a desperate trade? How much time is justified time to take off? I so desperately wanted time to pause so I could heal. But due to this inner guilt, I looked for trades to cover my colleagues at a later time in exchange for some time off now. As we were trying to heal, the roller coaster of life continued. In November of 2023, we got the awful news of my grandmother passing away in India. I had not even overcome the grief of prior losses when I had to confront a new loss. I loved my grandma, but I told myself that she was of age and lived a fully functional life. At this moment, I once again wanted to pause time, but I just kept moving. I didn't even think about taking time off and kept on going to work. Business as usual. December was dark. It was tough going to work pretending like nothing had happened, and then taking care of other people's grief and being supportive to them. I had started to meet some new people in a new workplace who were extremely supportive, but to most of my colleagues, my story was just a secret that lay inside. I was confronting the complexities of grief in the most isolated manner. In January of 2024, I had a packed workload since I traded so many shifts around in the fall. I remained hopeful for a fresh start. It lasted 4 days as I got the call from India that my mom's brother, who I was very close to, my dear uncle, had gone for a scheduled bypass surgery and there had been a complication. He was 60 years young, relatively healthy and full of life. You see, he had significant post-op complications that led to a cardiac arrest and significant anoxic brain injury? How do I tell my mom that her brother has had such a devastating brain injury that he would never be able to come back from? How do I tell my workplace of yet another family emergency? How do I tell them that I needed to rush to India so I can hold my uncle's hand and give him a dignified goodbye? How much time can I even take? Do I blast another desperate email looking for trades? Fortunately, I found a trade and we flew to India. I flew back in 9 days only to go to work the day after my 30-hour flight. I so desperately wanted time to pause so I can heal, but time was moving. So right about now, you might be wondering, why do I share the story of this roller coaster? Because in my story lies the story of the emotional roller coaster of many healthcare providers. Because grief is so complex and needs to be recognized and talked about, especially in our field. Because grief is triggering, draining, spontaneous, and life-altering. Because in my inability to pause time lies the bitter truth of many physicians' inability to pause time, even when it is so desperately needed to be paused. When I shared my story, there was an outpour of personal vulnerabilities that other healthcare professionals shared with me. In the healthcare profession, we deal with the most emotionally draining work environment that requires resiliency to provide the best patient care. But what happens when this so-called resiliency reservoir gets tapped out? Unprocessed grief leads to burnout, emotional exhaustion, medical errors, lower job satisfaction, feeling of failure, and in turn affects patient care. As physicians, we're so trained to be numb to negative charge, and sometimes showing vulnerability is seen as a perceived weakness. This makes asking for help feel like a mountain to climb. We are expected to be perfectionists both by ourselves and our environment. So, what do we do about this? Our role as medical educators and healthcare professionals is to protect the well-being of ourselves, our learners, and our colleagues. So, what I'm proposing today is a 3-step call to action to help pause time for ourselves and people around us. The first step is recognition. Recognize that grief is so complex and it impacts everyone so differently. When dealing with our trainees and our colleagues, ask how they're doing and invite them to express genuine vulnerability. Take your trainees' concerns seriously and offer help when able, even when they may initially say no. Do frequent check-ins as grief is so isolating. Help them set up an appointment with grief counseling, EAP, or PCP. Encourage them to take bereavement days, or simply do a kind gesture and remind them that they're valued. The second step is creating space. This is literal and metaphorical. Express your own vulnerability to allow others to share their vulnerabilities. This is how we will change the culture of this profession. Give patients and colleagues space to talk instead of shutting down the conversation with, "It's going to be all right." Literally change the setting and environment from, for example, a workroom to a cafe where you create space for a much needed conversation. The last step, the third step, is advocacy. In order to change the culture of this profession, we will need to advocate at the organizational level. In one call to action article in the Journal of Academic Medicine, the author so eloquently writes, "The death of a loved one can change how you exist in the world and your identity as a healthcare professional." So let's advocate to create a support group for grief and tragedies at healthcare institutions, including med schools, residencies, and at faculty level to humanize this process. Advocate for more days of bereavement leave in your program if it is necessary so that colleagues can bereave for their loved ones with a safe space. So, in the beautiful chaos of this constantly changing single moment, I ask you, my friends, can you help pause time even when it may seem that it cannot be paused? Because in doing this, you will help shift the culture of this profession to one that values the complexities of grief. Thank you.